Not gonna lie, I had no intention of watching this movie. From the first time I saw the name, I was like, this does not look good. And then I saw the trailers and I was like, wow, this is not my sense of humor. Something you should know about me right off the bat, just to help understand the bias that I'm looking at this with, is I don't really tend to like family films. You have to be like Megamind or Into the Spider-Verse or How to Train Your Dragon or like Shrek for me to enjoy your movie if you're a family film. Of course, a lot of the Disney classics as well. Like I do enjoy a lot of family films, but as a general rule of thumb, I can often find them really cringe, especially the new ones where I don't have any nostalgia on them at all to sway my bias. However, I heard that K-pop Demon Hunters was animated by the same studio that did Spider-Verse. I heard the fighting was really cool. I heard the music was great. So about 2 months later, I decided, you know what? What could be the harm? Worst case scenario, even if I don't like it, which is kind of rare for me to just not like a movie, I'll at least be able to get a pretty good video out of it. So this is the obligatory K-pop Demon Hunters video. I want to talk about my thoughts and opinions. This will kind of be a writing advice light video where we talk about character dynamics and chemistry and a bit of like show don't tell. But ultimately, I want to also just give some of my thoughts on the movie as a whole. The first like quarter of the film, the first like 30 minutes, I was like, wow, this movie is everything that I thought it would be. It was just as cringe and it was just as not good as I thought it would be. It was so simplistic. I thought the characters were incredibly boring. I thought the plot was kind of straightforward and not really interesting. And I thought the bad guy was probably one of the lamest bad guys ever. Either we're looking at that handsome, good looking, super hot K-pop idol daddy boy who at the start of the movie is really boring, or the bad guy is a giant bonfire that wants souls and is kind of like throughout the entirety of the film never very interesting, which I think is fine in the entirety of what the film's going for, but I definitely wasn't latched on to that guy. And then you have the mindless demons who progressively get more intimidating as the movie goes on, but at the beginning they're kind of a joke. However, one thing I will say about the movie, I think a public execution of demons to start off your concert is probably the most metal thing you could ever imagine. And I want more epic fantasy to do stuff like that. So that's a dub while we're talking about this first quarter of the film. So let's talk about the three main characters, because that's what's really important when a story is starting, is that we introduce our main characters and that we care about our main characters. However, I felt really disconnected from the main characters. The only character I really liked from the beginning of the movie was Rumi, and like everyone else didn't matter to me. And this is where I want to get into some of the writing advice here, because we're gonna take this and just bounce off of that as we go through, because I feel like the dynamics of the characters improve throughout the entire film. But as far as the beginning of the movie goes, I feel like it's really poorly done. So I want to start off by talking about show and tell, or show versus tell, or show don't tell. I'm not going to die on the hill of show don't tell. I don't think that is a perfect rule. I think if you're starting out writing, you should probably follow that and learn what it helps you do. In the past, I've talked about how I don't think writing advice is a exact science or hard law to follow, but I do think these things can help sometimes. And I think what's more important than show don't tell is, if you're going to tell, then you better be ready to show, which I don't think K-pop Demon Hunters does at the beginning of its movie. We start off this movie with a whole exposition dump about the hunters, what they're doing, and about who these three girls are. And the exposition dump it's all right. You know, I don't have a big problem with it. The problem I have is that they gear up these girls to be quite different from each other, and you start hearing about these girls and you go, "Oh, we might get some like really interesting dynamics within our characters." And then they show our characters and immediately they do the exact same things.
Our fans deserve the best.
It should have been me!
And I could see where some people like this as, you know, an argument of they're so in sync, or they have harmony at the beginning of the movie. Oh, harmony. That comes back later in the movie. Because our actual introduction to these girls is them all eating a bunch of food. And while that's a neat little gag, I feel like I would have been more invested had I seen them like pig out in unique ways. Maybe they're fighting over something, maybe they're trying to pig out in their own way, maybe they're, you know, like the point is less about like what they need to be doing. I don't want to be saying that they need to be doing this. What's important is knowing how they are different and how that complements aspects of other characters, as well as that brings conflict with other characters, especially when this movie specifically is all about how this conflict that happens due to the story kind of drives a wedge in between these girls. And yet the conflict kind of starts to fall flat on me early on when this is how in sync they are. It feels like they could just talk out their problems from the beginning of the movie. But it doesn't really feel like there's this disconnect aside from one thing, which I think is why Rumi kind of has the most main character energy of the film, and why Mira and Zoe just kind of feel like side characters. Like, not even like main side characters, they just kind of feel like they're a part of the movie the same way that characters like Bobby are, or even Genu. Genu feels like more of a main character in this movie than Mira and Zoe. And that's because he and Rumi will have more conflict and more differences, but also complement each other in more unique ways than Mira and Zoe will with Rumi. However, I don't want to be too much of a downer, and I've talked a lot about the beginning of this movie so far. I do think that as the movie progresses, it just gets so much better, to the point where even the second time I watched through the movie, I just enjoyed the whole thing. And that's because at the end of the day, despite not promising the conflict at the beginning of the movie, the conflict was there. Despite not promising particularly interesting characters, Mira and Zoe do become more interesting as the film goes on, even if they don't get nearly as interesting as Rumi. And I feel like this movie does a really good job as it continues on after that first quarter to get progressively better, because we see the differences of the characters start to push and pull at each other in more dynamic ways, and it feels more earned when certain things occur throughout the film. And all in all, I think it goes from being a bad example of having character dynamics to a really good example of having character dynamics as we get more into the third act. I feel like the end of the movie where they're starting to really break apart but then come back together, and then they backslide a bit, breaking apart even more, and then they come back together for the end. That was really well done, and that was really well earned, in my opinion. And the fight scenes were good, and the stakes, they got higher, so that's good. So the enemies actually started to seem more intimidating, and ultimately the whole plot between Rumi and Genu, that was just good. It was just solid, you know, that was great. So what do we learn from this movie? We learned that if you're going to tell, you need to also show. We learned that if your characters are too similar to each other, they can start to feel less like characters, less realistic. But as soon as you even do a little bit to show the differences between them, they can start to feel more human, and you can lead to more interesting conflict, and you can reach really good narrative points that can make the audience feel something. We also learned that when your story hinges on conflict between the characters, we need to know immediately what those conflicts are, because that will lead to the most engaging version of that story. And I think the Rumi and Genu plotline really shows that. But at the end of the day, no matter what I say about this movie, there's no doubt that people love this movie, and this movie works really well for most people and even works pretty well for me. You know, it's taken me like 23 minutes to realize that having the metal pipe as the background for the video might not be recognized super well. The movie's really enjoyable. I think there's stuff to learn about what to do with writing as well as there is what not to do with writing. I think it's a movie that everybody should watch at least once. But regardless of whether you love it or you hate it or you think it's all right, however you may feel about it, there's definitely something to learn from this movie. Or at least I certainly feel like I learned something from this movie. Anyway, it's been a while since I've just rambled off the cuff for a video like this. I don't even know how to end a video like this anymore. This is so sad. How do I stop? Is this an addiction now? At what point do the video just end? Do it just end when I say the end?